Good morning. Well, I did not get a chance to tell you yesterday that I'm going to be at a meeting this morning. So you're going to be using this video to complete your math work for today. And we're going to be combining two lessons, the absolute value and coordinate plane, and a conceptual and a procedural lesson. So if you are sitting in seat 2, go get the math books for your group quickly and quietly, and then open up to page 295. Okay, ready? Get the books quickly, quietly, and 295. Go. Okay, you should just about have the books passed out. Opening up to page 295. And as you are getting to that page, we're going to take a look at the what we are learning, why we're learning it, and how you'll know you've been successful. Well, what you are learning today is how to find the absolute value between 2 points located in one or more quadrants of a coordinate plane. Well, you already know that absolute value is distance from 0 on a number line. So we're going to use what you know about absolute value to determine the distance between two coordinate points. Why we are learning this? Well, being able to determine the absolute value between 2 points helps us to make connections when adding or subtracting integers. Next year in 7th grade and in 8th grade, you will be working with integers, positive and negative numbers, and adding, subtracting, multiplying, and dividing. But when you're adding and subtracting, what you're learning with absolute value and determining the distance with coordinate points is going to help you to make those connections. And how will you know you've been successful? Well, you'll be able to locate the points and determine the quadrants of each point. You'll be able to count the number of spaces between the points and to add or subtract the difference between the coordinates that change. Remember, if your x coordinates are the same, it's your y coordinate that will change. If your y coordinates are the same, it's the x coordinates that change. So you will be looking at that to determine what that distance or what that change is going to be. So let's take a look at the vocabulary. The absolute value, the distance between 0 and any number on the number line. And they're showing you -4 and 4. So here, if I want to find -4, I'm going to start at 0, and I'm going to move 4 spaces to the left. If I want to find +4, again, I'm going to start at 0. I'm going to move 4 spaces to the right. The distance between -4 and 4, I have to go all the way to 0 and then continue going 4 more spaces. So the absolute value of -4 and the absolute value of 4 is 8. That represents the distance. So here we go. We are not going to have problem of the day today because I am combining a conceptual and a procedural lesson. So let's start with the input model. Remember, pencils are down, looking up here. And I first want to find the distance between G and K. Well, I need to write the coordinate points. So I'm going to put G. And my X coordinate is 2. My Y coordinate is 2. So my coordinate points are 2, 2. For K, again, my X coordinate is 2. My Y coordinate is -2. So I'm noticing that it's my Y coordinates that change, not the x coordinates. Now, before I calculate the difference, I'm just going to count the distance from G to K, and then I'm going to confirm with using absolute value. So I'm going to start with G, and I'm going to count 1, 2, there's the x-axis. I need to continue through the x-axis, 3, 4. So I have a distance of 4 spaces. I'm now going to use the absolute value of my y coordinates, and I need the absolute value of 2 and the absolute value of -2. Okay, this is what I'm graphing here, the distance from here to here. And the absolute value of 2 is 2. The absolute value of -2 is 2. 2 plus 2 equals 4. And that's what I counted with my spaces, was 4 spaces. So when your coordinates are in different quadrants, you're going to add the distance between the coordinates to find the total distance between both ordered pairs of numbers. And again, this crosses over the x-axis, so you're going to go to 0 and then keep going through 0. Now, I want to find the distance between point A and point E. Well, I'm going to do the same thing. I need to find the coordinate points for A and the coordinate points for E. So I'm going to look at A, and I'm going to find my x coordinate first. Well, x coordinate is -4. So for A, x is -4. Y is 8. For E, x is -4. And y is 1. So I want to find the distance from the y coordinate at 8 and the y coordinate at 1. Let me take out this other number. And I want to find the distance between these 2 points. Well, one way that I can find it, just like I did here, is counting. So I'm going to start at A and I'm going to count down to E. Okay, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. There's a distance of 7 spaces. But now I want to confirm that, and I'm going to look at my y coordinates. And I'm going to have the absolute value of 8. Because these are both in the same quadrant, I'm going to subtract, and I'm going to subtract the absolute value of 1. Well, the absolute value of 8 is 8. The absolute value of 1 is 1. 8 subtract 1 is 7. And again, I confirmed my distance in counting by subtracting the absolute values, and I found the same answer. Okay, so now let's get ready for structured, guided practice. And here we go. We're going to be looking at the absolute value to find the distance between 2 given points. And we're going to start with points T and O. T and O. And I'm going to have you work individually first, and then you're going to share your answers or what you think the answers should be with your partner. So the first thing I want you to do is determine the coordinate points. I'm going to abbreviate here. Coordinate points for T and O. What's your X? What's your Y coordinate point for T and O? Then I want you to determine which quadrants they're in. Are they in the same quadrant, or are they in different quadrants? And then I want you to determine the distance. Okay? Determine the distance by counting. and then write the absolute value for the coordinates that change and find your answer using the absolute value. Remember, if they're crossing over an axis, like this is crossing over the x-axis, you need to find the distance to 0, and then you need to continue for the other number. So you're going to be adding if it's different coordinates. When we get to this one, you're going to be subtracting because they're in the same coordinate. But we're going to start first with T and O. So find these 3 pieces of information individually first, and then sharing with your partner. Take 1 minute to find the information alone, and then, because I want you both to talk, take 2 minutes to share your answers, decide if you're correct, and agree on your final answer. So pause the video here for 3 minutes and begin. Okay, so let's check and see how you did. Well, I'm going to put T here, and I'm going to put O here. And the coordinate points for T, X is 5, Y is 4. So my coordinate points are 5, 4. My coordinate points for O, X is still 5, Y is -3. So I have 5, -3. And I can see that my Y coordinates are going to be different than my X coordinates. So T is in quadrant 1, O is in quadrant 4, and the distance, I'm going to count first, and then I'm going to calculate the absolute value. So I'm going to start at T, 1, 2, 3, 4, have to cross the x-axis, 5, 6, 7. So I count a distance of 7 spaces. Well, I'm now going to use absolute value, and I'm going to use my y coordinates. The absolute value of y, actually I'm going to absolute value plus the absolute value of -3. Well, the absolute value of 4 is 4. The absolute value of -3 is 3. 4 plus 3 is 7. So in counting, I found a distance of 7 spaces. Adding the absolute value, because they're in different quadrants, I get a distance of 7 spaces. So now let's take a look at W and O. So first thing I want you to do this individually and then share first. Remember, you're going to find the coordinates, then you're going to find the distance, and then you're going to find the quadrant or quadrants that this is in. So again, 3 minutes, pause the video here, determine your answers first, and then talk with your partner and see if you are in agreement with your final answers. Okay, pause here, and in 3 minutes, check back in. Okay, so I'm going to do the same thing again. I'm going to find the coordinate points for W and for O. And W, my X coordinate is 2. My Y coordinate is -3. So I have 2, -3 for my ordered pairs, or my coordinate points for W. For O, my x-axis is 5. So I can see that my x-axis is the one that's changing, and my y-axis is -3. So when I need to use absolute value, I'm going to need to use it for my x coordinate points. But before I determine that, I'm going to count the distance, and I'm going to count 1, 2, 3. So now I'm going to take the absolute value of 5 and the absolute value of 2, and these are both in the same quadrant. So I'm not crossing over an axis, so I'm going to subtract. The absolute value of 5 is 5. Subtract the absolute value of 2, which is 2, and I get a distance of 3 spaces, which is what I got when I counted. Okay, so I found it by counting, and I confirmed it by using the absolute value. So now, let's see if you're ready for final check for understanding. Final check for understanding, you are working individually. You are not discussing and talking about this. And you're going to find the absolute value to find the distance between W and G, and then between S and N. Okay, so again, you want to find the coordinate points. You want to determine the distance by counting. Kind of hard to write on a keypad. Okay, count the distance. You want to determine the quadrant. And you want to determine if you're going to add or subtract. Okay, so pause the video here. You're doing both sets of points. Pause the video here for 4 minutes. Remember, you are working individually. You are not checking or talking with your partner. This is the final check for understanding to see how you go or how you do. And at the end of 4 minutes, check back in, and then you can make corrections if you need to at that time. Okay, get ready and go. Okay, so I'm going to write the ordered pairs for W and for G. So looking for my X coordinate for W, the X coordinate is negative 4. And my Y coordinate is 1. For G, my X coordinate is negative 4, so X is not changing on this one. My Y coordinate is 4. So I have my coordinate points. I'm going to count the distance. 1, now I'm crossing over the x-axis, so I'm going to keep counting. 2, 3, 4, 5. So I have a distance of 5 spaces. Now I'm going to determine the quadrants. W is in quadrant 2. G is in quadrant 3. So they're in different quadrants. So I know I'm going to add the absolute value of the coordinate point. And my x's are the same, so I'm going to be adding the absolute value of 1 plus the absolute value of negative 4. Well, the absolute value of 1 is 1. The absolute value of negative 4 is 4. 1 plus 4 equals 5. And that's what I counted. The distance was 5 spaces. So I confirmed my distance when I counted by adding the absolute value of the coordinate points that change. So now on to S and N. Well, the first thing I need to do again is write the coordinate points. I need the ordered pairs. So I know, one, which point is going to be changing, and if I'm going to add or subtract. So S, my x-axis for S is 2. My y-axis is -3. Not axis, coordinate point, sorry. For N, my x-coordinate is still 2. My y-coordinate is, wonder how many of you caught that when I said -3 for S, because I was looking at N. So let's do S again. My x-coordinate for S is 2, but my y-coordinate is -7. I was doing it for S, but I stopped at point N. So I have 2, -7. Now, my x-coordinate for point N is 2. My y-coordinate for point N is -3. And I noticed that both of these are in quadrant 4. They're both in the same quadrant. So I know I'm going to be subtracting the absolute value of my y coordinates. So I didn't count first. So we're going to count the distance from S to N. And there's 1, 2, 3, 4. So now I'm going to take the absolute value of -7. And because they're both in the same quadrant, I'm going to subtract the absolute value of -3. Well, the absolute value of 7 is 7. The absolute value of -3 is 3. And I'm subtracting. 7 subtract 3 is 4. So again, I confirmed the distance that I counted with finding the distance using absolute value. Now, we're going to be going on to page 299, and that's going to be the introduction of that lesson. The structured guided practice for the procedural lesson should be on page 300. So find the structured guided practice for this lesson, and we're going to do the same thing, except this asks you now to write an equation. And that's what I wrote when I did the absolute value of both points and equals whatever the sum or the difference was. And so we're going to do the same thing here. And I'm going to start with D and J. And I'm going to do the first one, and then I'm going to have you work together for the second one. So I'm going to find the coordinate points for D and for J. So D, X is -4, and Y is 3. For point J, X is -4, so my X coordinate is the same, and J is -4. Now, I'm looking at these 2 points, and I notice that D is in quadrant 2, J is in quadrant 3. They're in different quadrants. You're crossing over the x-axis. So I know I'm going to have to add the absolute values of these 2 points to find the distance. But first I'm going to count and then confirm with the absolute value. So I'm going to start at D, and I'm going to count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So I have a distance of 7 spaces. Now, I'm going to take my y coordinates because those are the ones that changed. And I'm going to take the absolute value of 3. They're in different quadrants, so I'm going to add. And I'm going to add the absolute value of -4. Well, the absolute value of 3 is 3. The absolute value of -4 is 4. 3 plus 4 is 7. And that's what I counted when I counted the distance from D to J. So now I'm going to erase this here so I don't get confused when I'm finding UR and U. So I'm first going to find the coordinate points for R, and then I'm going to find the coordinate points for U. So point R is right on the y-axis. So my x coordinate, when I'm looking here where my y-axis crosses over the x-axis, x is 0 for R. Y is 1. And now I need to find the coordinate points for U. Well, I'm looking for my x-axis, and my x-axis is -9, and my y, not axis, my x coordinate is -9, and my y coordinate is 1. So I notice that my y coordinates do not change. So I know I need to find the distance for my x coordinates. And first, I'm going to count the distance here, starting at U and counting to R. And there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I have a distance of 9 spaces. And now I'm going to, and they're both in the same quadrant, I'm going to subtract the absolute value of -9 and the absolute value of 0. Well, the absolute value of -9 is 9. The absolute value of 0 is 0. 9 subtract 0 gives me 9. This is the equation that they're asking you to write. This is the equation. Okay? So that's the equation that explains calculating the distance between D and J and calculating the distance between R and U. So now on to another final check for understanding. And you're going to do the same thing. You're going to find the distance between Y and B and the distance between P and C. And again, start with finding your coordinate points. Find the quadrants that they're in. Count the distance, and then use absolute value to confirm the distance and write your equation. Okay, so again, pause the video here for 4 minutes. Check back in after that, and we'll see how you did with final check for understanding. Okay, ready? Go. Okay, so again, I'm going to start with finding the points for Y, and I'm going to find the points for B. So my x coordinate, see if I can stop saying x-axis. My x coordinate for Y is -3. My y coordinate for y is 2. For b, my x coordinate is still -3. So my x coordinate did not change. That looks like a T. I was starting to put another parentheses and I realized I already had one. -3. And my y coordinate is -7. So I notice my x coordinates are the same. My y coordinates change. I also notice that y is in quadrant 2, b is in quadrant 3. So I know I'm going to need to add the distance. Before I do that, I'm going to actually count and then confirm it using absolute value. So I'm going to start at y, and there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I have a distance of 8 spaces. Now I'm going to confirm this using the absolute value for my y coordinates, and then I'm also going to write my equation. I want the absolute value of 2 plus the absolute value of -6. Well, the absolute value of 2 is 2. The absolute value of -6 is 6. 2 plus 6 is 8. And that's what I determined when I counted the distance here. Now, I'm going to find the coordinate points for C, the coordinate points for P, and I notice they're both in the same quadrant, so I know I'm going to have to subtract the absolute value. But first I'm going to write the coordinate points, and then I'm going to count and then confirm using absolute value. So my x coordinate for C is 4. My y coordinate for C is -3. My x coordinate for P is 9. My y coordinate for P is -3. So I notice my y coordinates are the same, so I'm going to use the absolute value of my x coordinates. But before I do that, I'm going to count, and then I'm going to confirm using absolute value. So I'm going to count from P to C, and there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, and I'm looking at the order here in case you were wondering, why didn't I go from C to P? It wouldn't make any difference. It would still be a distance of 5. So now I'm going to use my x coordinates, and I want the absolute value of 9, and I'm going to subtract, because they're in the same quadrant, the absolute value of 4. The absolute value of 9 is 9. The absolute value of 4 is 4. And 9 subtract 4 gives you 5. Okay? So, you have seen several examples. Again, here is your equation. And here is your equation for this one. It's an equation because it has an equal sign. And you are calculating the distance using the absolute values of the coordinate points that change. So now I'm going to have you continue working silently and individually on student practice. If you finish before the end of the period and your partner finishes before the end of the period, you can compare your answers and see if you are in agreement or if you have different answers. But now there's a lot of points here. It looks kind of busy. So make sure you're identifying which ones you're going to start with and which way you're going to move. Okay? So Until the end of the period, work quietly on the student practice, and I will check them with you tomorrow. Okay? Good job.